Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Let's Learn ES6. My name is Ryan Christiani, and in this video series, I like to go over some of the new features available to us in ES6. Today's episode will be looking at promises. Now, promises we've had for a while. We've had libraries like Q and Bluebird, but we've never had them natively in the language. So before we actually talk about them natively in ES6, let's talk about how these promise libraries were built. So promise libraries have been built based off of a standard called Promises A+. This is an open standard that was sort of implemented to help explain how promises should behave and how they should work. So that when you're creating your own library, because you could go out and create your own promises library if you wanted, you could figure out what was going on there. And great thing about that is that jQuery 3.0 actually now implements the Promises A+ sort of spec so that they follow the same sort of rules as these other libraries like Q or Bluebird, and ultimately how ES6 or ECMAScript 2015 follows the same API. So, if you've never worked with a promise before, a quick rundown is a promise represents the eventual result of some sort of operation, typically like an asynchronous operation. So stuff like an AJAX request, you've probably used $.ajax before, and even if you weren't using jQuery 3.0, they still returned a promise-like object. They call them deferred objects. But you don't have to use just AJAX. It could be like an animation or something along those lines. And a promise has a couple states to it. So we'll talk about the states in a second, but promises have a pending state. So when we create the promise and we haven't actually succeeded with what we wanted to do within it, or rejected or had an error, it is pending. We can then change that state to be fulfilled, or commonly referred to as like a resolved state. So if things are good, everything was successful, we go into the resolve state. And then you can also reject your promise. So it could also be if there was an error or something along those lines, you just reject the promise and it is rejected. So promises are available in Chrome 32 plus, I think it was 32 plus, Firefox 20 something, and Edge 12 or 13. Not Internet Explorer, so what we're going to do today is we're just going to use a simple script.js and an index.html. Actually, I don't need this Babel file. I'm just going to, or the, not Babel file, package.json file, because I just copied over my folder from before. We're just going to use a script.js and an index.html file here. We don't need to transpile. However, if you are going to use Internet Explorer or something like that, you're going to have to make sure that you transpile down. Or you could use one of these great libraries. So in ES6, the promise is a constructor, and when we instantiate it, it'll return this new object for us to work with. So let's make our first promise, and we're going to use a lot of new features, so a lot of stuff like let, arrow functions, and all those kind of things. So in order to do that inside of our JS file strict, we need to set useStrict on. useStrict, if you've never used it, was introduced in ES5, and it allows us to sort of restrict the syntax we're able to use. JavaScript will fail less silently, and it just allows us to sort of use some new stuff. So that's pretty neat. And let's start. Let's say let my promise equal new promise. So we use new to instantiate a new promise, and that will return that into our myPromise variable. And inside of the myPromise, we need to supply what's called an executor. So the executor is the callback that will be run when the promise is instantiated. And it actually accepts two arguments. We have a resolve and a reject. And you can call these anything you want. The resolve you could call fulfill if you wanted, but typically you see resolve and reject. So the way this works is that we do some stuff in our code, and when we're ready, we've successfully kind of fulfilled our promise, the role that it's going to play here, we can resolve it. So let's do that right away. So we say resolve, and we can pass in some information. So you might pass in some JSON data if you're doing some sort of like API request and then did something with it. Or in our case, we're just going to pass in a string. We'll say good to go. So the way promises work is the object assigned now to our promise, myPromise variable, has a couple methods on it. And what we need to worry ourselves with is the .then method. So currently right now, we can't really get anything from this. So if I save this and I refresh and take a look, so make sure you open up that index.html in your browser, you'll see that we have nothing here. So if I do my promise dot then, and then we pass in, we can just do another arrow function here. We can say this. The then method takes two, what's the word I'm looking for? Arguments. It takes a resolve. Maybe I should finish typing before I keep talking. It takes a resolved or fulfilled callback, and then it takes a rejected. So let's just see it resolved first, and let's see how that looks like. So you save that, you run it, and instantly it will print to the console. Good to go. Now, promises are all about some sort of asynchronous event, so the eventual result of something. So let's just set a set timeout here. Out. So that we can actually see what happens when we wait a little bit. So I'll just move this resolve up to there, and let's make it wait 1 second. So we're just taking some time. We're gonna in a second, or roughly a second, we're gonna resolve our callback. So if we refresh, it's not there, and then it's there. So this is great. And again, if you think Ajax, you're making a request to some server, it's gonna take a little bit of time before it comes back. It's not gonna be an instantaneous thing. Now let's actually reject a promise. So let's just set another set timeout here. And I always like that there. And let's set it to half a second instead of 1 second. So one thing to note with promises is that once that promise changes its state, so once it is either fulfilled or rejected, it can no longer change its state after that. So what's going to happen is once our promise is rejected, it's going to reject first. Well, you know what? Let's save this and see what happens first. Save that, refresh. You get uncaught in promise, So we actually have to handle our error here. So the first argument, the first parameter in the then method is going to be the fulfilled resolved handler. And we can handle our errors in two ways. So we can add another one here to handle our rejection. So if we do this in console.log error here, we'll no longer get that uncaught error. We'll see that we get the and we never get good to go. So we can handle our errors like this. So if there was some sort of error or some sort of rejection in our promise, we can do this. One way that's a little bit cleaner is if you, instead of passing two functions to .then, you could actually use another method called .catch. And what .catch will do is it will basically do the exact same thing. It will handle your rejection or any sort of error caught in your promise. So if we go console.log here, error, we refresh, we get the same exact thing. So that's pretty neat. So you can use this to create your own sort of asynchronous events. Maybe there's a couple things you want to do before something is resolved or fulfilled, and you can use new promises, so ES6 promises, to do that. I want to take a look at also how we can do multiple promises. So one great thing about some of these great libraries out there, and in jQuery, for example, we have like $.when, is that they can handle multiple promises at the same time. So we don't want to just always listen for one thing when it resolves, do another thing, etc. We might have 2 or 3 sort of events happening. So maybe think some sort of complex animation. And when they're all sort of done, then we want to move on to our next functionality, like the next thing that we want to do in our program. So let's remove this myPromise.then here. And let's add a second promise. So we'll say, let my promise 2, really good names here, I think, equals a new promise. And again, it gets an executor that gets the resolve and reject in there. And let's just, you know what, let's remove the reject here in promise 1, and we'll just add a set timeout in our second promise, and maybe we'll make it a little bit longer. We'll say, I don't know, second and a half. And oops. We'll just go resolve promise to the promising. Sure, whatever. Okay, so we have 2 promises. They're obviously going to be doing something a little bit more than just resolving with some text, but in our case, they're going to look like this. So there is a static method on promise that is called .all that will take an array of promises, so more than 1, 2, 3, whatever you want, and it will wait until all of them are resolved before running a then method. So let's just see what that looks like first. So promise.all. And inside of it, we need to pass in an array. So we can do my promise, comma, my promise 2. And what the .all method actually returns is, wait for it, another promise that is resolved when all the promises passed in resolve. So if we go .then, we can say something like this. And we'll just say data for now. So console.log data. And if you save that and refresh your page, you'll see after a certain amount of time, good to go, and promise to the promising returned as strings. So you could use that data, and once that's all ready to go, if there was like JSON in there, you could go ahead and use that. I do want to point something out though. The all method will only get into the .then's on fulfill handler if all of the promises resolve. If one of them is rejected, so if you had like 20 for some reason and 19 of them resolved, but one of them rejected, it would not get into here. It would get caught in the catch, or like we were looking at earlier, the second callback inside of then, but catch might be easier to look at. So console.log error. And let's do this. Instead of promise 2 resolving, maybe we reject promise 2, and we'll change the message to, actually, let's just leave the message. We know that promise 2, the promising, is the promise. So if we wait, we see that, oh, it actually rejected, and it prints out that error. So you could handle your errors there. And that's really good. You always want to make sure that you are handling the errors. You're not just kind of assuming everything is going to work, because when does that ever happen, right? So that's really good. There is actually another method we're not going to look at, but called .race that will resolve once any of the promises either resolve or reject. Once it instantly happens, you get access to the information. But in our case, .all is good enough to look at. But you can definitely check that out. Check it out on MDN if you want. Yeah. So let's look at a real-world example. Let's use the new Fetch API. So I'm just going to lead all this. So Fetch is a new API in the browser. It's not an ES6 feature, it's just a new browser API. And it's a new easy way to make HTTP requests. So it looks pretty straightforward. So we say fetch, and we need to pass in a URL. So I'm just going to use, and I'm just going to copy and paste the link here. I'm going to use an API we use in class. At HackerU. It's a simple jokes API that just returns jokes. When we're teaching APIs and teaching AJAX, something as simple as this is perfect. So fetch itself will return a promise that will resolve to something they call a response object. So let's see what that looks like. We can use .then, and we get our resolved handler here. So we'll say res. And I just want to show you what res looks like first, because we have to do one more step to actually get access to our data. So if we run that, you'll see that we get this response object back. And if you open it up, you can see a bunch of things. You can see body, use body, headers, okay, status, et cetera, et cetera. And actually, if you open up the prototype, you can see some more things. What we're going to use is this JSON method. So by default, it just doesn't give us the JSON data back. We actually have to tell it to do that. So we need to use res.json. Wow, I can't spell at all today. And would you know it? .json, that method actually returns another promise. So this promise that the .json returns will resolve when it's finished parsing the data to be JSON. So we can say .then, and what I'll do is, as our resolved handler, I'll just say, not res again, we'll use data. So console.log data. So if you save that, and we'll just clear this, refresh, there you go. You can see our actual returned results here. Someone once tried to tell Chuck Norris that roundhouse kicks aren't the best way to kick someone. This is being recorded by historians as the worst mistake anyone has ever made. Oh, is that it? Ever made, ever. Yeah, it's pretty good stuff. It's not really. Anyways, so We've used .then, we have our resolved handler here. But again, we probably want to make sure that we catch errors. So let's put .catch, and I just want to show you, let's like mess up the URL, and we can see how it handles that. Console.log error. So for example, say you don't type your URL properly, you do something like this, save that, refresh, and you can see that it will throw the error. Type error failed to fetch at type error native. Not super intuitive instruction here, but you can start to figure out and be like, oh, line 10, there's something wrong there. So that's fetch. Fetch itself utilizes ES6 promises internally, and we can use those as we want. And you can see that even other methods are using it. The .json method, for example, returns a promise. So it's promises all the way down. So next week's video will be a bit of a special one. I have a little announcement I'm pretty excited about. So we won't be looking at a feature, but in the next week, we'll be looking at either modules, or we'll be talking about the class, the new class feature. Not sure which one yet, but we will get to both of those at some point. So hope you've learned a few things about promises, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.